Hello YouTube, welcome back to my channel. Thank you guys so much for all the continued support. I've been working very hard to get my instrument rating done and I passed. I finally did it. After a discontinuance and a day of heavy winds, I still managed to get it done. So today I'm going to go over everything that I went through on my Checkride. So let's just go ahead and get started. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to brief what I went through and then how you can study for your instrument Checkride. The first thing you're going to do with your DP is you're going to sit down, you're going to review your hours, and he or she is going to ensure that you are actually qualified for the Checkride. I myself made an instrument Checkride binder. I'm going to make another video because my last one had some weird music in the background. I apologize for that, so I'm going to make another one to kind of make up for that. So here's an instrument rating Checkride binder. Now, the first thing you want to do is you want to have a very neatly organized binder. So the first thing I did was go to your ForeFlight. Hopefully you're logging your hours on there because it's just the simplest way to do it. And I actually went ahead and got all of my hours from when I passed my private pilot Checkride, which was about 6 months ago at this point. And I got all of my hours. And what I did was I highlighted my instrument time, cross-country PIC time, and my dual receive time. And I added them up all at the bottom. So if you ask me, okay, when did you do your long cross country, your 250 nautical mile cross country? It's all highlighted, ready to go. I have all of my hours tallied up at the bottom, even though it tells me I can see, okay, these are the amount of PIC cross country time, simulated instrument. And when you start a Checkride off that way, you are well organized, you have all your hours tallied up, and anything he asks you can reference to immediately. That will already set the tone of the entire Checkride to come, the next 2-3 hours of the oral and the flight portion. It shows that you're very prepared, you're very professional, and it shows that you care, and the examiner will be impressed by that. Whether they say it or not, they will really appreciate that. The second thing you want to have is your IACRA, which is just a paper copy. So I went ahead and blurred out all the important information, but just have the paper version, your 8710, I think is what it's called, printed out. Next, you want to have your written exam results. I got them in here. And the next thing you want to have are all of your aircraft documents. So your DP is probably going to ask just for the annual to make sure that the aircraft is current to fly that day. But I went ahead and did the airworthiness. I added the registration, all of the airworthiness directives. I printed out weight and balance. And then I also did pedostatic transponder, all of the required stuff, VOR, everything. And then I have a couple emergency/POH aircraft systems in case I was asked about that, which in my case I was not. But it's all about aircraft systems. So let's get into the Checkride. That's what you're going to start off with. Okay, he's going to ask you for these documents. Be sure you have your FTN with you. You have your license, a second form of ID with your photo on it. For example, a passport, that could work, just to make sure that you're very prepared, okay, because that's going to set the tone for the entire Checkride. Also, be sure that you have a backup. So if you're using ForeFlight like I did, I have an iPad here. Be sure that you have a second iPad or just your phone. That'll work too. Or a laptop, something. Probably a laptop couldn't be a backup because you're not going to pull out a laptop in the plane in case something happens, but just as a backup because things happen. You never know. You might drop your iPad going out to do your pre-flight and it completely breaks, right? So be prepared. So we'll split this into two parts, the oral and the flight portion. So for the oral, we had to discontinue at the very end. So we got through that. And then the flight portion I did 2 days later, which was yesterday. So for the oral, you start off with your 6 hits. So what do you need to be a PIC? He's going to ask you 6 months. What about 7 months and then 12 months? So be sure they want to hear the word, there's 6 hits and IPC. And then what do you need to fly today? You need your driver's license, medical certificate, your pilot certificate, so on and so forth. And then I'm going to go straight into the flight plan here. So I'm going to start recording on my iPad. All right, so now that we're on the iPad, here's the flight plan that I was given. It was Bozeman at Yellowstone to Cheyenne. So basically the whole idea behind a instrument Checkride flight plan, what the examiner is going to want to see is that you're able to mitigate risk and that you're able to understand and explain as to why you would plan a flight the way you did. So for me personally, in a 172, to capture the MEA of this flight, you have to be at 10,900 feet. And obviously if the airport's at 4,400, you can't just take off and connect into the airway at 10,900 feet. A Cessna 172 can't climb 5,000 feet just like that. So what my DP wanted to see is that I was able to explain why I was going to fly the ODP. He's going to talk to you about ODP. So in this case, it was the Bozeman 6. Here it is. And it is expired because I haven't updated it, but it's not a factor. So be able to explain Bozeman, be able to explain a obstacle departure procedure. You're going to get asked questions about this. How far out can you go? What happens if you're not at altitude by the time you get there? Okay, I'm going to do a hold. And then en route, what he or she is going to want to see is that you're able to explain what kind of weather you're going to experience on the way to your destination. They're going to ask about oxygen requirements. Okay, because you're at a high altitude, what are the oxygen requirements? Make sure that you remember where to reference them. I have here under my IFR section, I'm going to go through these right now, actually. So I have the ACS. I actually have it annotated, so I was able to use this on my Checkride. So in case I don't know something, I can say, you know what, I'm not too sure, so I can reference it. For example, here, information on alternates 91-169. So we went over the flight plan. She wants to make sure that you're flying at the correct altitudes. For example, we'll ask, okay, you're over here and you lose your radio. What are you going to do? Remember the acronym AVEF. It's assigned, vectored, expected, filed. So just make sure that you understand IFR cross-country procedures. The next thing he's going to get into is into the weather briefing. So please make sure that when you go into flights and you hit the briefing button, it's not able to download right now, that you understand everything, that you understand the prog charts, that you understand the winds aloft charts, be able to know, okay, when I fly through here, this is what I'm going to expect. And what she's going to do is switch up the times. So you can be like, okay, we can't leave right now because the weather's, pretty bad. When can we leave? Right? So you have to be able to mitigate the risk and say, okay, I think it's smart for us to leave at this time and get there at around this time. And if that doesn't work out, then this is what our alternate can be. And then it goes into alternates. So you talk about everything in that regard. Next, you're going to talk about approach plates. So approach plates was huge. So I was asked pretty much everything about approach plates. So for example, an approach plate, let's pull up this localizer approach. So on this ILS localizer runway 27, you need to be able to explain what everything on this approach plate is. So for example, this T and the A, non-standard takeoff alternate minimums, the localizer frequency, just you need to know what everything on this chart means. And then she's going to give you a scenario. Okay, you're flying in from this direction and you were told to fly at this position on the approach plate. How are you going to circle back to land? How are you going to intercept this waypoint? How are you going to enter the hold? Are you allowed to do a hold? Basically, they're going to give you real world scenarios. They're not going to say, okay, what is the frequency on this VOR? They're not going to say, it's going to be very situational based, and they're going to give you scenarios. So know everything that you see in front of me right here. Approach plates, know them all. They're all the same. They're just laid out differently. Be able to explain them. Next, the one thing that did catch me off guard was RVR and know where to reference it. I knew it was in the digital terminal procedures, which we'll get into right now, which are all of the IFR documents that you need to have. So in your ForeFlight, go ahead and make an IFR section. Advisory Circular 91-74 talks about icing. So icing is a huge part of instrument flying. Next, get the South Central, or I guess wherever you are. I'm in Texas, so I use the South Central chart, and this will tell you all. It's like your information for all the airports. For example, you can find VOTs in there if they ask about that. Find everything in there. It's a very useful tool, and you might need it on your Checkride. Again, the ACS, obviously you need that. That's what you're being tested on. It's the guidelines. And the Digital Terminal Procedure Supplemental has to be one of the most important IFR Checkride tools that you need to have access to, that you need to know and understand how to reference. So, for example, here I had pulled up RVR. So on one of the approach plates, it said 24. Like, okay, well, it's not 24 miles of visibility. It's RVR 2400, which means your visibility has to be at least half statute mile visibility. Next, you scroll through it and you can take a look at it for yourself. I'm not going to go over it, but here, for example, you might see one of these on just a regular IFR low chart, and you may ask you what that is. Oh, well, find it in here. your holding patterns. Here are all your different types of holding patterns, misapproach, arrival. Okay. So I'm not going to go too deep into it, but everything is broken down in here. So make sure you study this and you know how to reference this when you don't know something. Next, the top tools that I used was IFR Low Legend. Again, this is another thing you need to know. I actually went ahead and made a paper version of this and printed it out so I could study it. Set it as my wallpaper. Guys, please know everything that is on an IFR low chart. There isn't that many things, so be sure that you know everything on here. It's really not that difficult if you really study. Everything on here is just very plain. It's very, some of it's kind of similar to just a regular VFR chart. For example, the Class B, Class C airspace, it's very similar. It's also highlighted. Your off-route obstruction clearance, it's very similar to the maximum altitude in a sector on a VFR sectional. You also have your VORs, your DMEs, your TACANs. You should know that from your private, as well as your military training routes. That's the same. The communications boxes are exactly the same. You have your types of airports. They're just colored, so they're in brown, green, or blue. Next, what we'll get into is GPS systems. So be sure that you're able to explain, okay, he's going to ask you, what kind of GPS are you flying with today? Okay, I have a Garmin 530W. Okay, so tell me about it. Okay, so the 530W, W for WAS, it means it's a WAS-equipped GPS, and it's able to load approaches and departure procedures, and just be able to explain what kind of GPS you have, what you need to use it, what happens if you don't have it. He might ask you, okay, well, it goes out. What do you do? What do you do? So next thing I was asked personally about, I don't know if you're going to get asked about this, is how you would receive weather while en route, right? So you might be asked, okay, so you're flying along today. How are you going to get weather on the way? So what he was looking for was NextRad. So some of these modern planes with these advanced avionics, they have a NextRad system, which will tell you what is to be expected up ahead in your flight plan. So NextRad has its limitations because it's not always accurate and up to date. So what my DP was looking for is to say that it could be out of date. And if there's a fast moving storm that you see in front of you, that could move really quickly and you may not anticipate it, right? And then you got into thunderstorms and weather, so on and so forth. The next thing we got into was the pitot-static vacuum airs. You're going to get asked a lot about systems. So IFR is all about interpreting systems and understanding what the airplane systems are telling you. And then we went on to psychological factors, because that is also something that can cause confusion if one of these systems fails. So for the flight portion, I'm going to just go straight into the flight portion. So for the flight portion, he shows up. I already had the plane pre-flighted, ready to go. He's like, are we ready to go? Yes. So I told him I went ahead. I went out of my way and said, okay, we have 5 quarts of oil, 30 gallons of fuel. The fuel pumps are out of service, so we're going to do our check ride. When we come back, I'll drop you off and I'll go get fuel afterwards, okay? So if your DP shows up and you tell him all this stuff, you say, this is how much fuel we have, this is how much oil we have, this is what's going to happen, it shows that you're even more prepared. So tips for the flight portion. So I flew a localizer approach, and conveniently the approach that I was practicing on doing, or that I thought I'd be told to do, it actually went out of service the night before my check ride. So I flew a different one at a different airport, but it wasn't really a big deal. They're all the same. So I flew the localizer approach, and then I flew 2 RNAV approach. One of them was a circle to land. Then we did a hold, and then we did unusual attitudes, and that was about it. We also did a departure procedure out of my airport that I fly out of. Now, for some final tips, because that's pretty much all an instrument check ride is start off strong. Show up prepared. Be sure that if there's anything at any given point that you don't understand when you're flying with your double I, that you ask questions. It's the most important thing you can do. Because if you're flying and you just brush things off and you're like, okay, this is too stressful, or I don't think I can do this, and you don't ask questions, and then you're asked about it on your check ride, this could be a pass or fail that could mark your entire rest of your pilot career, right? So be sure that you practice and that you reference these documents that I told you guys about here. And I'll have in the description all of these documents. Another one that was really good is this IFR at a glance. So I went through the entire thing, IFR at a glance, and the Pilot Cafe documents. I'll have both of those with the annotated ACS for free in the comment section down below. Just go to the Google Drive. I'll make a folder. So another thing that you can do is the ACS lays out exactly what you're going to get told to do on your check ride, right? So Heading plus or minus 5 degrees. Your altitude. Altitude is the most important thing about the IFR Checkride. Make sure that you are at the right altitudes, that you don't screw that up, because that it's not the end of the world. You don't have to be perfect. They're looking for consistency, but just make sure that you are aware of your heading, your altitude, your airspeed, all of that, your time. And again, ask questions if you're unaware prior to the check ride. Don't wait until the day of the check ride. If you ignore these things, it could really bite you. All right, guys, so that's a simple debrief of how my check ride went. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate you guys tuning in, and I will see you guys in the next video. Have a good rest of your day.